I am so happy that you are here. I'm excited to get to do my second, ooh, everything blinked off for a second. I'm so excited to get to do my second webinar. I'm just gonna give it just a couple of seconds for people to tune in. When you show up, just let me know where you're tuning in from and let me know why you're on this webinar. What you hope to learn from it. Maybe if you believe that you are sugar addicted, some things that you've tried in the past that have worked, or maybe some things that haven't worked for you, what you're hoping to learn from this, any of the things, because I will certainly send you some more information. If you have something that doesn't get answered during this webinar, please let me know, because I am happy to. All right, I'm just looking for, I was looking to see if anybody was on, making sure I'm in the right spot, and I am. So I'm excited about this webinar because it really piggybacks off of the last webinar that I did. And I'm gonna give you, if you missed that, it is about metabolic dysfunction, what it is and why do we care. Super important information. I'm going to give you a little nutshell about what I shared in that so that you can have that little bit of information that this will build off of, and we can keep moving forward. And what I hope to do, because just like we are one organism, we're not broken into the individual body parts. We're actually just one organism that works in conjunction with all the other body parts. We're one ecosystem. That the information that I share is not in isolation. So we're just going to continue to build and to build and to build on what we've talked about in previous webinars. So if you haven't gotten the webinar, just the previous one, just let me know in the comments and I'll be sure that you get that link. The other thing that I ask you is that if you find value in what I'm sharing here, and you know someone that needs what I'm sharing, the information that I'm sharing, or the help that I offer, then please add them to my page, get them in touch with me so that I can see how I can help them, and definitely make sure that they get this webinar. Okay, so let's backtrack just a little bit. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version, and if you're not my age, you might not know what that is, but it's kind of the cliff notes of what we talked about in our metabolic dysfunction webinar. When we talk about metabolic dysfunction, we're getting a really pinpoint, precise, narrow view of what's going on at the cellular level. Actually, what's going on inside of the cell, inside of the mitochondria. And think back to sixth grade, science class. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it is instrumental in metabolism. So really quickly, metabolism is essentially where you eat a hamburger and that hamburger gets chewed up and smushed up and sort of broken down by the stomach and by the first part of the small intestine, and then it goes into the bloodstream, and it's fuel now, and it is in the form of glucose and fatty acids, and it gets transported in the blood to the cell, and then it enters the cell as this fuel. And then once inside of the cell, it's going to enter the mitochondria and get broken down and converted. That glucose is going to get converted into ATP and waste products. Okay, so that's metabolism in a nutshell. But I want you to remember that what happens when we have a dysfunctional metabolism is that we are providing too much fuel to the cell because of what we're eating. And that looks like our standard American diet that is full of toxic fats that are kind of ultra processed vegetable oils or seed oils. It can be full of high fructose corn syrup, and there's lots of hidden sugar in the food that we're eating. And so that's all fuel that gets brought to the cell. And when it enters the cell, it enters the cell as glucose and fatty acids. Glucose is ready to enter into the mitochondria and to go through this big long chain of enzyme reactions in order to produce that ATP on the end. But don't forget that we have this waste product. So when we're oversupplying the cell with too much sugar, processed foods, high fructose corn syrup, then not all of that sugar can get brought into the mitochondria. The mitochondria is a little bit overwhelmed. And so it gets stored in the cell. And you can imagine inside of the cell is not only the mitochondria, but there's a lot of other organelles, and there's kind of like a superhighway system, so that messages are getting transferred around the cell, enzymes, hormones are getting moved around the cell. And when you have this huge storage of fatty acids and excess glucose that can't enter into the mitochondria, it gums up that work, and so signaling inside of the cell stops. Essentially, the function of the cell starts to get a little wonky, and the cell isn't performing its cell duties like it should. The other part of this is that as we are providing more and more glucose into the mitochondria, we are producing more and more ATP, but we're also producing more and more waste products. And those waste products are called oxygen-free radicals. You might have heard that in something that you've read or something that you've seen on social media, but that's where antioxidants come from, that they are trying to break down that toxic waste product so that it can't damage the mitochondria, the cell itself, the cell membrane. When it does that, even though there's an abundance of fuel that could be turned into ATP, the mitochondria is no longer functional, and you actually have a decrease in ATP production because of all the excess waste products and because of all the excess fuel that's sitting in the cell and gumming up the transportation system inside of the cell. Okay, so that's just the basics, and we're gonna look at kicking sugar addiction in its sweet little face from here on out. All right, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed. And so when you have these cells that are dysfunctional, it really depends on what the function of that cell is as to what kind of symptoms you're going to notice from that. So if it's a gut cell that is overwhelmed with too much fuel and it can't produce enough energy, then you're going to notice that you have reflux or bloating or constipation, IBS, leaky gut. If it's a kidney cell, then you're going to notice that your kidney function is less. If it's a brain cell, you're going to notice brain fog. You might have memory problems, so it really depends on what the work of the cell is as to what the symptom is going to be from that dysfunction, from that metabolic dysfunction. So I hope that makes sense. If not, feel free to ask questions. I probably won't get to them live, but I will certainly make sure that you get the answer if I have to send you a direct message or something. So remember, sugar is the purest form of fuel that enters the cell. And I have friends who argue with me about this, and they say that sugar is sugar is sugar. And there's two ways to look at that. So one way is that all sugar is created equal, whether it's honey or whether it is high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to tell you that is partially true and partially untrue. So honey, although it's natural and it sounds like it's so much better for you, in the cell, it reacts the same way. So honey and table sugar are going to react exactly the same way in the body. Honey is not better for you. It might be more natural, but it's not better for your cell. It's not going to do anything different in the cell. But when we're talking about sugar, let's say table sugar and high fructose corn syrup, they are not the same. They do not enter the body, they do not enter the cells the same, they're not metabolized the same. So high fructose corn syrup doesn't require insulin in order to enter the cell. So let me just remind you, the role of insulin is to allow glucose, its only job is to keep our blood glucose at a normal range. So when our blood glucose gets too high, insulin is released, and it causes these glucose channels to open up on the surface of the cell, on the cell membrane, and allow glucose to leave the bloodstream and to enter the cell. That's what insulin's job is. And so fructose and high fructose corn syrup doesn't require insulin in order to be let into the cell, but it doesn't enter the cells throughout the body. It enters into the liver cells almost exclusively. and it doesn't enter into the mitochondria of the liver cell. It actually gets stored as these toxic fats and turned into triglycerides. So this is going to be a talk about cardiovascular health that we're going to have later on, but I want you to hear that if you're someone who is suffering with high triglycerides, that has nothing to do with cholesterol, has nothing to do with fat intake. It tells me that you are having problems with carbohydrate metabolism, that you are likely someone who is enjoying that standard American diet that is chock full of processed foods, processed grains, and high fructose corn syrup, because that's why you get a high triglyceride level. It has to do with how your liver is metabolizing carbohydrates, metabolizing sugar, not fat. Okay, so I hope you're taking notes and I hope that you're hearing me. But let's talk about how prevalent sugar addiction actually is. So we have increased the amount of fructose that we get in our diet by 3,000% in the last 50 years. And I don't want you to forget that fructose is the type of sugar that comes from fruit. But fructose is also the type of sugar that comes from beets, it comes from corn, and it's highly processed to make it into fructose. And it's added to about 77% of the items that are on the shelves in the grocery store. So it's out there everywhere. But the average American takes in this day and age, 22 to 30 tablespoons of sugar in a day. 22 to 30 teaspoons of sugar in a day. And so the recommended amount, and just know this amount has climbed every decade for the last 5 decades to where it is now. And for women, the recommended amount is to stay below 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, or 25 grams of sugar. That's the same for children. And for men, that number is to stay below 9 teaspoons of sugar, or 36 grams of sugar. And you might be saying, 9 teaspoons of sugar is a ton. Absolutely it is. But that's the same thing that you can find in a cup of orange juice, or that's the same thing that you can find in a sugary beverage, like a carbonated beverage, like a soda. So just know that it is very easy for us to take in too much sugar. And I want you to know kind of what your goal is to stay under. Now, if you're sugar addicted, we might even need to lower those goals, and I'm going to explain why. So I personally have been addicted to sugar a couple times in my life. I've probably kicked sugar addiction in its sweet little face at least 2 or 3 times in my life. And you might be like, well, why so many times? And if you knew how to beat sugar addiction, why did you ever get addicted again? And I'm going to tell you there's 2 main reasons. The first one is that it's easy. You know, I searched the literature to find out about how long it takes for us to become addicted to sugar, and what I found is that about 12 days. And what I have found personally is that I have become addicted to sugar at the end of a tub of ice cream. So let me explain. So imagine that you were at work, you were super busy, you didn't get lunch, now you're having to, shuttle kids around to maybe some sporting events, or you have to do something right after work, and you're still, now you're going off of breakfast. It's been hours and hours and hours since you've eaten. And maybe you have to stop at the grocery store because you don't really have anything to cook at home. And you are starving. You are hungry. And not only are you hungry, like you have that sensation that you're hungry, but your blood sugar is likely to be lower than what it should be. And so the life-saving reaction that we have is that we crave sugar when our blood sugar is low. Because remember, I said that glucose is the easiest, it's the most purest form of fuel that gets brought into the cell to be converted into energy. And when you're hungry and when your blood sugar is low, then the energy production of your cell is starting to decrease. And it's life-saving that you would have this craving, that you would crave sugar, because you can die from a low blood sugar. So it's actually life preserving that you have this craving. So you get home, you actually, you're starting to get a little shaky, you might be hangry, and you eat your dinner, and then, your blood sugar has normalized again. And then later on in the evening, you're just kind of reliving your stressful day. Like, gosh, I did way more work than what I was supposed to do, and Nancy Joe didn't do her work, and that's why I didn't get lunch. And so now you have these emotions attached to it, and you are sitting in front of the TV, and you're trying to relax, and you remember that you have that ice cream in the freezer, and so you go and you reward yourself for the stressful day with a bowl of ice cream. And so what happens is that ice cream is an immediate stress reliever. And the reason being is because it is going to cause dopamine to be released in the brain that stimulates our opioid receptors, that cause us to be calm, to even be euphoric, to be happy, to be relaxed. And so we've just taken care of that stressful day with a bowl of ice cream. And once our brains have that dopamine stimulating that opioid receptor, now that opioid receptor kind of gets turned on. So tomorrow you're going to remember how good you felt sitting in front of the TV, watching your Netflix and binging. And you're going to be like, I have ice cream in the refrigerator or in the freezer. I'm going to go get another bowl. And so now you do that 4 or 5, 6 days in a row, however long it lasts, and you have fed your opioid receptors, and you've created a little bit of a habit because you've had that dopamine flooding your system, and you've relieved your stress of the day by eating sugar. It's the same addictive center in the brain. It's the same opioid receptors that get stimulated whenever you do heroin, whenever you drink alcohol, whenever you take fentanyl. It's exactly the same process that causes sugar addiction, that causes any type of addiction. Sometimes it's even harder to treat. And I don't want to minimize anybody that's ever had an addiction, but when we say sugar addiction, I hear people kind of laugh about it and just sort of minimize it and say, oh, I just have a sweet tooth, or I have to have dessert. Or this might be you. I know it used to be me. You're sitting on the couch and you're not eating ice cream, but you're drinking a couple glasses of wine and you're eating chocolate. And you might not be equating that wine and that chocolate to your sugar fix, but that's providing your sugar fix for the day. And I'm going to explain to you why we get those cravings, especially at night. And it's all about how our body is wonderfully made, and sometimes it works against us. So I told you about the dopamine receptors, the dopamine release, and the opioid receptors that are occurring in the brain. But the other thing that happens is that you have all kinds of bacteria and fungi and microorganisms that are living inside of your gut, specifically your colon. And some of those, we have all kinds. And I don't really like to say that you have good gut bacteria and bad gut bacteria, because they all serve a purpose. But we have some gut bacteria that we want to be in small amounts because they have a tendency to kind of take over things and overpopulate themselves and then run out some of the other bacteria. So what we end up with is a less diverse gut microbiome. We have a lot of this really kind of bossy gut bacteria, and then we have less of these more meeker and mild bacteria. And I hope that makes sense to you. But one of the things that happens in the gut microbiome, in that gut bacteria, is that when you feed it sugar, those bossy bacteria kind of take over, and they do anything that they can to preserve themselves. One of those things that they do is they release an enzyme that leaves that gets sent through the vagus nerve up to the brain and stimulates the brain to crave sugar. And the reason that we have this craving specifically at night is because of the circadian rhythm. Your body knows that it's about ready to go to sleep, and it's about ready to be without food for 6 or 8 or 10 hours, it just depends on when you eat breakfast. And so it sends that signal at night so that it gets a ready supply of glucose so that it can last through the night and keep going. So I'm going to give you another little tidbit of information about this gut bacteria that loves sugar, is that when you start to cut out sugar out of your diet, those cravings will actually get worse, because as those bacteria are starting to die off, they increase the amount of enzyme that they release into the brain to stimulate more and more cravings. So I tell you that because, like I said, sugar addiction is really hard to kick. And so I want you to know that if you're having worse and worse cravings and you know that you're cutting out sugar out of your diet, just know that that's those bacteria dying from your gut, and they're sending out an SOS signal, and they're sort of giving it their all right before they die. And right before they die, you can have some terrible cravings because they're just releasing all of their enzymes as they disintegrate and die. So just know that as that's occurring, as you are killing off those gut bacteria, that you actually might be experiencing more and more cravings. Okay, so gosh, this seems like bad news that I'm delivering, but I do have some good news. We're going to finish with some good news. So there's essentially 4 phases of addiction, and sugar addiction is no different. So I thought that I would just talk to you about them so that you might recognize why you're having some of the symptoms that you're having, or why you're having the reaction that you're having, because it's a true addiction. And it doesn't really matter if it's a true addiction for you or not, and I'll explain a little bit further. But I want you to understand why you're having the symptoms that you're having. So an addiction starts with binging, and it's usually a higher than normal intake after a period of absence. So it might be that you have this big bowl of ice cream after that really stressful a day that you've had, and that is the binging that you're having. It could be that you eat an entire bag of Twizzlers because you're stressed out. I mean, it could be anything, but it starts with binging. And then you can have some withdrawal symptoms. So when you haven't fed your opioid receptors or your gut microbiome the sugar that it wants for a little while, then you're going to have withdrawals. And what that's going to look like is stress. It's going to look like anxiety. It can look like depression. It can look like irritability. You blow up at your kids. You can't really think. I mean, that could be the evidence that you are actually withdrawing from having that regular hit of sugar. Then that's followed by craving. So that's an intense motivation. You're really going to do just whatever it takes. You're going to get in your car. If you don't have something in your refrigerator, you're going to get in your car. That is so funny. You're going to get in your car and you're going to drive to the quick stop for something sweet in the middle of the night because you don't have anything in your house. Like, that's going to be, that's an enhanced motivation. And then the last phase of this is sensitization. So what that is where you have an increased response to your regular hit of sugar. So it could be that you're just feeling especially calm and relaxed from the sugar hit that you just took. Or you could have that same response to maybe fat and salt and the crunch, anything that goes along with what you're taking in when you're taking in your sugar. The other side of that same coin is tolerance, and that's where you need more and more and more sugar in order to have that same effect on those opioid receptors and that same calming effect in the brain, or that stress release. But it doesn't matter if you fit these criteria, if you can say, oh, I have all of this and I'm addicted to sugar, because you know whether you're taking in too much sugar. And how you know that, what sugar addiction or what too much sugar intake looks like in your life is going to be, is it after that 12th cookie? Is it after the 3rd cookie? Is it, after the 6th night that you've had ice cream? It's all about the feelings that you have associated with that sugar. Okay? So do you feel in control? Like for me, luckily I'm not a sugar addict. And so I can walk past cookies on the counter or in the break room and I'm not inclined to have some of those. But do you have control over it? Can you pass something in the workspace that in the work lounge that is sugar, and you can't pass it by because you have no control over yourself? Are you thinking about that bowl of ice cream that you're going to have later on tonight all day long? Are you eating and snacking on sugar all throughout the day? Or are you snacking in general all throughout the day? If you can't go more than about 90 minutes without eating, I'm going to tell you that you have a problem with sugar. Do you overeat, like you eat the whole container of ice cream and then you feel ill because you ate so much and you kind of have a little bit of regret because you ate so much? Or that you eat sweet foods that you don't even like just because it's sweet. So when we're losing control and when we're thinking about sugar all the time, that's an indicator that you really need to stop and take a look at how much sugar you're getting in. And you probably need to listen to what I'm going to tell you next about how we're going to fight those sugar cravings. And why do we care about this? I mean, what's the big deal about? So remember back to that mitochondrial dysfunction. Remember back to the fact that we're delivering more than enough fuel to the cell, but we're actually putting out less and less ATP, less and less energy, less and less work from the cell, that so much that the mitochondria is dysfunctional, the cell membrane is dysfunctional, and the cell is dysfunctional. And that's where we're going to start seeing those symptoms. And that mitochondrial dysfunction is the start of every single chronic disease that you can name. Every single one of them. So it's important that we know what we're putting in our bodies and that we get control of how much sugar and processed foods and high fructose corn syrup. Okay? So 10 things that we can do. We're going to end on a high note, and I think I'm going to make my 30-minute. I always want to be respectful of your time because I want you to keep showing up and I want you to keep inviting your friends. And you can say it's going to be 30 minutes. I promise. She's going to hold it to 30 minutes. Okay. So 10 things that you can do. The first thing, and this is a big one, is that you prioritize getting protein and fiber from food with every meal, especially breakfast. Because what can happen if you're just eating a lot of carbohydrates and you're not adding in even a little bit of fat is gonna delay gastric emptying. It's gonna delay how quickly your blood sugar rises, and you're not gonna have so much up and down of your blood sugar. So you wanna be sure that you're adding protein, a little bit of fat, and a lot of fiber. I tell everybody that you wanna get your fiber from food and not from a fiber supplement, and we can talk about that in another webinar. And that you want to aim for 30 grams of fiber a day. And once you start paying attention to it, it's not going to be hard at all for you to reach 30 grams. And if you're already hitting 30 grams, I want you to increase it to 45 grams. Because fiber is actually a prebiotic. It's food for those bacteria that you want living in higher amounts, not necessarily good, but that you want to be filling up your gut microbiome, and they're gonna keep those sugar-loving, bossy gut bacteria at bay. So feed your gut fiber and protein. Don't skip meals, because then you are not out of control. You're not having that life-saving reflex of I've got to eat carbs right now in order to get your blood sugar up the fastest way that you can. I want you to focus on nutrition of what's in what you're eating. So, and this goes out to all my friends who say a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, and that is not true. I want you to focus on the nutrition, because you're actually feeding your cells. So imagine that if you had 300 calories from Twizzlers, or if you had 300 calories with broccoli, it's going to act very differently in the body. The outcome is going to be very different. Have willpower. If you're going to have willpower anywhere, have it at the grocery store. Because if you don't bring it into the house, you don't have to walk past that cabinet or that refrigerator or that freezer and know that that ice cream is calling out to you, or those cookies are calling out to you. So make sure that you go to the grocery store not hungry, not frazzled, not stressed out, not with a low blood sugar. Because if you don't bring it into the house, then you don't have to have, willpower every evening at 7 o'clock when you watch your favorite show. Plan and prep. And plan and prep is going to be having food. It could be meal prepping. It could be planning that you have quick and easy foods that you can reach for that are just as easy as that bowl of ice cream, that are ready-made, or that are just finger foods, something easy to eat. So that if you do get that hangry feeling, or if you get that low blood sugar feeling, that you can snack on something that's nutritious. And that does take a little bit of planning. And again, we might have a whole webinar about meal prepping, because I love to meal prep and I can give you some really good tips and tricks. So I want you to keep coming back. Have you noticed? And then get moving, because if you are able to move your body, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy, you can dance around the house, you can go for a walk around your yard or around your neighborhood, but when you move, you are actually using up some of that ATP in the cell so that it creates space for your mitochondria to function again, and for your cell to signal again. And you are going to release cortisol, because, you're going to decrease stress, and you're going to decrease your cortisol, because cortisol works on the brain and it stimulates our appetite. And that's why you might be getting those cravings at night as well, after a stressful day. And it works on the liver to increase insulin and to, that increases our blood glucose, and it increases our cravings. You're also going to want to make sure that you have a good sleep routine for the same reason, that when you are tired and you're sleep deprived, that a hormone in the body called ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, is stimulated. Even when we're not hungry, it fools our brain and it fools our stomach into thinking that we're hungry, and so we're going to be snacking. The eighth tip is that I want you to stay hydrated, because sometimes when you think that you're hungry, you're actually thirsty. So before you go and you start binging on, some high sugary snack, I want you to drink a glass of water and make sure that it's not just that you're dehydrated for the day. A good rule of thumb is that if you weigh 100 pounds, that you should have a half an ounce for every pound of weight. So you should take in 50 ounces of water. If you're 150 pounds, you should be taking in 75 ounces of water so that you are staying hydrated. Feed your gut. You want to feed your gut fiber so that those gut bacteria actually win out over those more bossy, sugar craving bacteria. And then the 10th and final tip that I have for you is that you learn to read labels. And I already have, a grocery store, like how to make it out of the grocery store unscathed webinar planned for us. And part of that is reading labels. Just know that There's a lot of crap on the front of the label. Most of it doesn't have to be rooted in one bit of truth. So if it says low fat, no added sugar, be sure that you're turning that thing around and you're reading the back of it. And my pro tip, the bonus tip that I'm giving you today, is that you eat foods that don't have a label. So you're eating whole foods, and you're eating, meats and vegetables and some fruits, and that you are eating things that you don't have to know how to read the label on. So thank you for tuning in. I so appreciate you being here. I hope that you got something great out of this, and that you send your friends my way so that they can watch this video and this information too. Let me know if you need the webinar about metabolic dysfunction, and I'll be sure to send it your way. Thank you.